So the other day I mentioned that I had a bunch of Stephen King hardcover first editions, and I got a few different comments that were pretty flippant, that were kind of like, oh, that's crazy. That's like 50 grand worth of books. And it's not really. Let me kind of explain this. So my wife and I are professional full-time resellers. And so books is one of the things that we sell a lot. So we make it our business to know the value of things. So there's a couple things that are important to distinguish with first edition books. Just because something is a first edition doesn't necessarily mean that it's a first printing. Okay, so the way it works with publishers is an author puts out a book. They'll do like a limited run, like a first printing run of the books. And depending on the popularity of the author, depends on how many of those copies they make. And it usually starts in a hardback. And if that does well, then they'll do another round of prints and so on and so forth. So the ones that collectors are usually looking for are the first edition, first printing run. And for a lot of books, it's pretty easy to tell. So we'll look at this Rose Madder. This is a first edition, and we know it is because of the cover, but also it makes it easy to tell first edition, first printings, because often on the copyright page, books will have this number line here. Okay. Sometimes it'll actually say first edition on there, but you want to look for these number lines. And these weren't as common, I don't think, in the older days. So basically how this works if you see 1 through 10, that means that this is a first edition, first run. So basically every time they do a new run of copies, one of these numbers will disappear. So if this was a second printing, then the 1 wouldn't be there. Okay. So this is a first edition, first printing of Rose Madder. So here's a good example. This is a copy of Thinner, and you know this is an earlier Thinner because it's a Richard Bachman one. So it doesn't even say anywhere on this that it's Stephen King. This was something that was in the bookstore. But even though this is an older copy of Thinner, this is actually, if we look at the copyright page, it is a first edition of this book, but the first printing was November 1984. But it's missing a few numbers here. So this is actually, so we're missing 1, 2, 3, 4, and 10. So I think that means that this is like a 5th printing of Thinner. So it's still an earlier one where it's still Richard Bachman, but it's not a first edition, first printing. And so this copy of Thinner is not worth as much. It's also worth mentioning that stuff that's signed is worth an awful lot more. Some of these Stephen King books, though, so here's a newer, this is a first edition, I think first printing of the Institute, but this is a newer book. So it'll have the number line 1 through 10. Okay. And this is the first Scribner hardcover edition. This is my first edition, first printing of Dr. Sleep. There's the number line. So these are the ones where it's more difficult to tell. So I don't know what the deal was with, we know this is a first edition of Needful Things, but I don't know what printing this is. Because for whatever reason on these ones, they don't have a number line. And it's a lot of Stephen King's Viking ones that were published by Viking don't have the number line for whatever reason. And I don't get it. So it makes those harder to identify. This is a first edition of the Tommyknockers, and it even says first edition right there. So sure, I mean, there's some money here. But the cool thing is I've found most of these while thrifting. I mean, here you go, Gerald's Game first edition. I've got both the UK and the US first editions of Misery. This is when they first released The Stand complete and uncut in the early 90s. So this is a first edition of this version of The Stand. Right? This is another one that doesn't have the number line. First edition of Hearts in Atlantis. Actually, so this is a first edition of Hearts in Atlantis, but it's a third printing, or a second or third printing here. And to put this in perspective, we can take a look at this. So these are my prize Lord of the Rings. But this is actually the revised edition of Lord of the Rings. This is the second edition. Even though this is older, this is from the 70s. If we turn and we look on the copyright page, it shows our number line here. And this looks like it's a 15th printing of Return of the King. So this is the 15th time in the second revision, or sorry, this is the 15th time this has been printed, and this is the second edition of Return of the King. So that's what I mean. Yeah, I have like probably 10 first edition hardcovers. Not it, though. So I'm not lying when I say this. You just have to understand how it works. So hopefully that helps kind of clear that up. Cheers.